We continue now at the top of Daf Yod Gimel Amud Beis in Meseches Sukkah. This is Sukkah Daf 13b. On the previous summit, the Gemara had a brisa which seemed to indicate that if you have an agudas ezov, you have a bundle of hyssop for the process by para aduma, that if you have shira vechad, if let's say some of them fall out, you have one stem remaining, that's a problem. Problem was the beginning of the brisa said that if you have one stem remaining, it's fine. And so the Gemara now explains what the brisa really meant. It's only problematic if when you originally bind it, when you originally bind it, if it's only one, like when there's one remaining is okay if it starts with two. But if it starts with one, then it's problematic. Again, this is according to the Shita of the Rabbanon, as the Gemara had explained on the previous Amud. Rashi says, Ela atchilaso kai. The end of the brisa is going on a situation where you originally bind the ezov. V'hachi kamer. Here's what it means: Ein tchilaso pasal. When you originally bind it, it's only pasal atsheu kashir shirav. If you bind it as at the same amount that when it's remaining, it's okay. Meaning one. If you bind a hyssop with one stem right from the beginning, dainu echad, one stem, that's going to be a problem. Now, if you bind it again, starting with two, and it remains with one of them falls off, that's going to be okay. In any case, alma l'rabbanan shlosha dekamrinan le'el mitzvah. The point of this entire discussion is to say that according to the Rabbanan, when we said you needed to bind three stems, that's only a mitzvah chatchila. De'il akev hamani lo Rabbi Yossi v'lo Rabbanan. If it's ma'akev, that you're going to have three, so then this brisa is not going to fit with anyone. It's not going to fit with Rabbi Yossi or the Rabbanan. So again, the idea is according to the Rabbanan, it's only shnayim la'akev, shlosha is just la mitzvah. And the Gemara continues, Dorash Meremar darshins hani isuraisa de surah. If you have the isuraisa of surah, Rashi says chavilei kanim. These are bundles of reeds. Shal yuosin limchar b'shuk, and they used to bundle them together, bind them together in order to sell them in the marketplace. So mocher no sam b'minyan. That's how they sold them, by the number. So they're bound together in a certain way. Mesachin b'hu, you're allowed to use these and use them for schach, as Rashi says. Ve'ein bohem mishum gzeras otzer. Normally, you're not allowed to use bound, bundled items because of what we said before. Gzeras otzer. We're afraid you're then going to use schach that wasn't put up there for shade purposes, which would be a problem. The reason is there is no gzeras otzer because really it's not the normal way to keep these things bound all year in this fashion, as the Gemara will explain. Afagav de ogdan, even though they're bound, liminyona bialmahu de ogdan, they're only bound to keep track of the numbers. It's not something that you keep in this fashion, and therefore the binding is not a problem. You can even use it as schach with the binding. Rashi says, they're just bound until they get sold. And then usually the person who buys it to dry it out, he's going to undo the tie. Therefore, if somebody does use it for a sukkah, he doesn't even need to undo the tie. That's going to be perfectly okay. Amar Rabbi Abba says, "Hani tzrifi de urbani." If you have these are huts that are for people who they're made by aravas. They're made out of willow. Rashi over here says, "Tzrifi kimin kuch agul." It's like a round hut, kikova, like a hat. V'nachboim besochot tzayde. People who trap birds, they hide inside of these huts. The urbani asiman fe'aravas, again, they're made from willow, the branches of a willow tree. V'godlan oso mitachtov pivrachu v'lamala koshen rasha and etzarim. So it's wide at the bottom. They tie it up at the top. Bechevel with a rope. Kesher echad ken kli mitzuda shetzadin dagam katanim shosen beguma shekorn yunkash. It's tied in a similar fashion to these traps that are used to trap small fish. Avol ein betzrif shlosha v'arba bate ariga kemoshi yesh lemitzuda. By its tzrif, it's not woven in the same fashion that you have for normal traps. So in any case, the point is, it's tied in a certain fashion. So you have these huts. Kevan shehutra roshe madon shalahen. Once you untie the upper knot, so then kasher, and it's fine. You can use it for the sukkah. So the Gemara says, "V'agidim mitasai." But isn't there a binding on the bottom towards the mouth of this item where you enter? It's kind of woven, braided together. So Amar Papa answers, the Sharilu, you have to untie that as well. Rav Huna braid Rav Yoshua, Amar, but Rav Huna braid Rav Yoshua, he says, no, afilatem the lo Sharilu. You don't necessarily need to untie the bottom. Kol eget sheino asi lataltalo lo shmei eget. Because if something is bound, but it can't be moved around, then it's not considered a real binding. As Rashi over here says, sheino asi lataltalo kagon zel, like in this case, shemishahiter kasher elyon. Once you undo the top tie, if you're going to try to move it around, Melev, the whole thing would fall apart. Shein lo lapiv kalua, because it just kind of has this braided opening. Kamin gedil lechos as hanitzarim. So that's not going to hold together. So that eged is not really called an eged. It's not a problem in terms of schach. And just backing up one Rashi going on Rav Papa, who says you untie the bottom. Deshari l'hu matir roshay hachut. You untie the tops of the threads. Shu kalua, but where it's braided. Ve'enu tzarach lafkia hakli. You don't have to take apart the whole thing. Even according to Rav Papa, you're not taking apart the entire item. You're just kind of untying the top of these branches. And the Gemara continues. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Abba says in the name of Shmuel, Yerako shamru chachamim. When it comes to the vegetables that the chachamim say, Adam yotzei b'hen yedei chovaso b'Pesach. Those vegetables which are good for the chiyuv of morer on Pesach. So the halach is mevian es hatumah. If you make an ohel out of these yerakos, it's going to be mevi the tumah. That's going to count as an ohel in order to carry the tumah throughout the house. Ve'ein chotzitzin b'fnei hatumah, but it's not going to block the tumah like a normal ohel. Rashi will explain all of this. Uposlin b'sukkah misham aver. And also, if you use this for schach, it's considered like air. It's considered like there's nothing there at all, and the same amount that air would passel, this would also passel. Rashi will explain this as well. Rashi says, Yerako shamru chachamim bepesach shalim yotzi ben yedei mor chazeres ve'olshin ushar chavrosein dakos hem tin v'shbalaz. All of these things, they're very thin vegetables, and you're yotze from morer. Hilkach ein chotzitzin b'fnei hatumah. So therefore, the Rabbanan said that even though you're creating an oil over here, they're not going to be chotzitz b'fnei hatumah. They're not going to block the tumah from going up above the roof. Im sikech b'hen gag, if a person used it to roof the house. Umidrabanan hu degazer alayu. This is all a din derabanan. Shalo yismach v'alein lochos b'fnei hatumah, because we don't want you to rely on this. Dil masamchi alayu l'chiyav shinami, because we're afraid when they dry out, you'll also rely, and we'll see what the problem is when they dry out. Miu ba'odan lachachin. Nevertheless, when they are moist, chotzitzin midoraisa, they would be chotzitz on a doraisa level. This is all a derabanan. Mishum delo makabli tumah, because they're not makabel tumah. Delav ma'achol adam, because it's not something that's eaten by people. Well, l'chiyav, it's just when they dry in chatzitzas and chatzitza, their chatzitza is no good. Because they dry out, and so therefore they break apart and they fall down. They're not really sealing the roof. So that's where the problem is. Now they do carry the tumah throughout the house, but odan lachen while they're still moist. As long as they haven't dried out, it is an ohel midoraisa on a doraisa level. Uposlim b'sukkah misham avir, meaning kashir sha'avir poselba, at the amount that if you have airspace at the top of your sukkah, even if it's just 3 tvachim, that's enough to passel a sukkah. That's the same thing if you try to use these yerakos. Dahainu b'shlosha tvachim, 3 tvachim is going to be enough to passel. Kedamrina lekaman b'pirkan avir b'shlosha. We're going to say later on in the parak, airspace passel schach if it's 3 tvachim. We do not follow the shear if you use schach pasel. If you use schach pasel, the amount of schach pasel you need to pasel a sukkah is more than 3 tvachim. When it comes to schach pasel, really, you need 4 tvachim in the middle of the sukkah. It needs to be 4 amos if it's at the side of the sukkah, but we're not that lenient. When it comes to these yerakos, we consider it just like airspace, like there's nothing there, and 3 tvachim alone is going to be enough to passel the sukkah. And now the Gemara explains why. My time, what's the reason? Since these yerakos, when they dry out, they're going to break apart and fall. Command the less new dummy. We consider it as if they're not there at all. And the Gemara continues. V'yomer Rabbi Abba, Omer Rav Huna. Rabbi Abba says, in the name of Rav Huna, habotzer lagas. Let's say somebody is collecting grapes, harvesting grapes for the wine press. Ein lo yodos. There's no din of yodos in terms of the hilchas tumah. Rashi will explain. Rav Menashe bar Gada, Omer Rav Huna, and Rav Menashe bar Gada says in the name of Rav Huna, hakotzer l'schach. Let's say somebody harvests grain for schach, meaning he wants to use the stalks for schach. Again, the same halacha, ein lo yados, there's no halacha of yados in terms of the hilchas tumah. And Rashi over here explains, habotzer lagas, habotzer anavim lidroch osam, you're collecting the grapes, harvesting the grapes in order to step on them to create wine. Ein lahem yados lahavi ha'etz tumah la'ochel. So there's no halach of yados. Yados means the handles or the stems of fruit. The normal halach is the yad can bring tumah to the food. If tumah touches the stem, it can convey tumah to the food itself. Because in this case, when it comes to the grapes that you're using for wine, you don't want the stems at all. You don't want the branches. When we talk about yados conveying tumah, that's only by a yad, a handle that you're using. It could be be a yad by a kli, because a kli can be mekabel tumah, or it can be a yad of an ochel, some kind of a handle or a stem of a food. But that's only if you need it. Similarly, hakotzer l'schach in hakoshin miviyin tumah la'ochel. Let's say the straw that's attached to the grain, to the food particles, that's not going to convey tumah to the food. You don't need the food part, because the food part is not even kosher for schach. Not only that, if not for the fact that you had more psolas than ochel, have a pasal sukkah, it would be problematic to use this for a sukkah, because it would be majority ochel. Ochel is not good. Ochel is makabel tumah. That's not good for schach. So again, in this case, you're not really using the yad as a yad, and so there's no din of yados in terms of the hilchos tumah. And the Gemara explains, Man Amar Kotzer, the one who says Kotzer, meaning Rav Menashe bar Gad in the name of Rav Huna, who says by Kotzer there's no din yad. Kol Shekain Bozer, certainly by the grapes there's no din of yad. He doesn't want the branches, he doesn't want the stems to go into his wine. Man Amar Bozer, now the one who says Bozer she'ein lo yados, it's only Bozer that doesn't have yados. Aval Kotzer yesh lo yados, but the one who says Bozer ein lo yados, meaning Rav Huna, Rabbi Abba, the name of Rav Huna, who says Bozer lagas ein lo yados, but Kotzer for schach would have yados. Why? He actually wants there to be some food there because it helps him in terms of putting up the schach, because the food prevents it from getting scattered and then you're going to end up losing the schach. So you actually want the food attached to the stem in that particular case. As Rashi over here says, he wants the food to be attached to the stalks, to the straw, because if the heads of the stalks, if the food part gets detached, so then in such a situation, it might scatter, you're going to lose it. So you actually want that component, so there might be a halach of yados according to that opinion. And so the Gemara continues, name will let us say, the Rav Menashe bar Gada tanoihi, the Rav Menashe bar Gada's halacha, that if you're kotzer l'schach, there's no yados, really that's a machlokas tanoim. The Tanya, because we learned in a brayso, soche ta'enim uvehen ta'enim, you have the branches of figs and attached to them are figs, parchilin uvehen anavim, you have the vines and attached to the vines are grapes, kashin uvehen shibol, and you have the straw and attached to the straw is the grain, mechabdos uvehen tamarim, you have the branches of dates attached to them as dates, kulan, by all of these items, in psolas meruba la'ochlin, if there's more psolas than ochel, if there's more branch than there is the food item, ksheira, then it's kosher to use for schach, v'imla psulin, if not it's pasul. Acherim, the acherim say, others say, ad shiu kashin meruban al hayados v'ala ochlin, the straw actually has to outnumber, has to be more than the handles and the food. It's not enough just to be meruba al ha'ochel, the yados also are part of the ochlin. And so the Gemara says, my lav is it not? This is exactly the machlokas tanoim over here. Demar savar yesh lehen yados. One opinion holds there is yados, meaning according to the acherim, the yados are considered part of the ochel, and the yados have to also be outnumbered by the straw. Umar savar ein lehen yados, and the Tanakam of this brayso holds no, there's no din of yados, and therefore the yados are not part of the ochel. And so the Gemara says, L'Rabbi Abba vadai tanoihi. According to Rabbi Abba, again, according to Rabbi Abba's position, kotzer l'schach yesh lo yados. There is a din of yad. So according to Rabbi Abba, it certainly is a machlokas tanoim. You're going to say, according to Rabbi Abba, that according to the acherim, there's yesh lo yados. According to Tanakama, there is none. However, Rav Menashe bar Gada milema tanoihi. According to Rav Menashe bar Gada, who says in general, kotzer l'schach ein lo yados, it doesn't necessarily, do we have to say it's a machlokas tanoim? Not necessarily, the Gemara says. Amar lach Rav Menashe says to you, the kuli al masavri ha-kotzer l'schach ein lo yados. It could actually be that everybody agrees kotzer l'schach, there is no din yados. Now, if everybody agrees kotzer l'schach, there is no din yados, the question is going to be the acherim. Why do the acherim say that the straw has to be more than the ochel and the yados? But he explains as follows: v'hachab mayaskinon. Here, what's the situation? Kegon shekotzetzon la'achili. You actually originally harvested it not for schach. In this brayso, you originally took it for food, and certainly the yados then will be part of the ochel. V'nimlach alein l'sikoch, and then he changed his mind and decided he wants to use it for schach, and that explains the acherim. That's why the acherim say the yados still have the same din as the ochel. But the Gemara says, one second. If he originally harvested for achila purposes, so my time out the Rabbanon. What's the reason the Rabbanon? Of course the yados are going to be the same as the ochel. The halacha is, if it's kotzitz on la'achila, the yados of ochlin have the same status as a ochlin, they're mekabel tumah. Of course it can't be used as part of the schach, the yados. So what's the reason of the Rabbanon that the yados are good for schach? V'chiteiman, if you're going to say kasavri Rabbanon, the Rabbanon hold, kevan the nimlach alein l'sikoch b'adolei machshavto, that when you change your mind and say you want it for schach, schach, suddenly now it can change status, and the yados can now be good for schach. Maybe that's what the Rabbanan hold. Umi batel olei machshava b'hachi, is a machshava batel with that small of a change? A person just changes his mind. But we learned in a Mishnah, kol hakelim, when it comes to all vessels, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video, and Daf Yodalid Amud Aleph.